Great. So, thank you, Nadine. Thank you very much. I'm going to continue now. So, a lot of people don't get married these days, of course, but a lot of people still do. And as I'm sure you're well aware, the success rate of marriage is not all that high. And amongst Christians, it's not all that high. It's just the same, in fact, for Christians or for people who are not Christians. A lot of marriages fail. And what people often say is that, there's some kind of common reasons for that. And one of the reasons, of course, is sin, sexual sin. People end up in adulterous relationships. That used to be very clearly wrong. It used to be the case that pretty much everybody universally thought that that was wrong, adultery. That's kind of changing now, if you've noticed. There's websites and all sorts that help you commit adultery. This is kind of bizarre, but it's very, very devastating for families. There's no winners in divorce. It's a lose, lose, lose. And it's a disaster. So sin is a big problem. Reasons marriages fail: neglect. Just no longer working on your marriage. People. I studied in Belgium a few years ago, and I was studying with this guy. It was a business course, and he was a young lawyer, a very together guy in some ways. He's about 33, 34. He had a couple of kids and was working through a divorce. And I said, "What happened?" He says, "Well, we just grew apart." Like, okay, but that's just neglect somehow. There's some kind of no, we're just going to live our own lives in a certain way under the same roof. That's not really it's not really a marriage. A good definition of marriage is a man and a woman committed to the next generation, in fact. This is their mission. Marriage is a mission. A man and a woman committed to the next generation. Neglect, rough times, things not going so well. That's kind of obvious, but some people have this idea of marriage that it's going to be just great for 50 years. And it probably will be great. Hopefully it will be great, but there will be things that you'll have to work through that help it be great, Timothy Keller, some of you perhaps know this quite well-known American minister, and he wrote this book on marriage, and he starts the book, he says, "I've been married to 5 different women in my life," which is kind of shocking, You're like, I thought this was a Christian book, what's going on here? And he says, "No, I've been married to 5 because my wife has changed at least 5 times, Like, the woman that I'm married to now is not the woman that I married." But that's just true, that we change as time goes on, and sometimes that can be challenging to work through these different stages of life and married life and family life. So there are kind of obvious reasons, those first 3. But these next 3 are a little bit less obvious. Getting involved in a relationship too early, when you're not, as Julianne says, ready to get married. When you're not perhaps fully mature, emotionally mature. You don't really know yourself all that well. You're not really able to say that this is the kind of person that I should marry. Getting involved too early. Marrying for the wrong reasons. Some people actually do that. Like, I really need to get out of my parents' house. Or, I don't know. Can you think of other reasons? Getting a passport, right? There you go. I never thought of that one, but... Which kind of passport would you like? That's right. Some people will come to Kairos events for our worship, and some people come for passports. Good. I'm just glad that Brexit's not going to happen. Anyway. Marrying for the wrong reasons. Thirdly, then, and lastly, an incompatible vision for life. Again, that sounds a bit kind of, ooh, that's a bit deep. But do we not work this out together as we date? What our vision for life is going to be? Well, kind of, but some things remain incompatible, and you just only succeed by making compromises on these things. Would it not be better to actually work out what your life is about first, and then try and find someone who has that compatible vision, like bringing up your kids as Christians? There's a lot of Christians who end up marrying people who are not Christians. That's actually, well, at least in the Christian tradition, that's a violation of the commandments. It's idolatry. It's putting something else before the Lord. It's actually pretty serious. People try to kind of get around that these days. We had someone living with us recently, and she said, my sister, she ended up marrying a guy who's not a Christian, and she said, I hope that doesn't happen to me. And I thought, what? Like, what do you mean? I hope it doesn't happen to you? Like something. Like one day you just kind of wake up next to this guy and you're like, are you a Christian? No, I mean, but it's actually very interesting that that's how a lot of people think, that love, romance, even marriage is something that happens to you. No, but one of our main points here is that this is actually something that we, as responsible Christian men and women, actively, not passively, but actively, as much as possible actively, need to think about, discern, and pursue the Lord on. You get my point? I'm going to ask my wife to share a few things now. So let's welcome her.
Good morning. So I'll just share briefly with you about my own experience in this area. I'll go back to when I was in high school. I was part of a community in Belgium ever since I was born. But then when I reached high school, my community went through a difficult time. It went through a crisis. So there was not really a support for me. I was quite on my own, like all the rest of us. But I believed in the midst of that, and Kairos really helped me in that as well. I believed in the midst of that the Lord still had a plan for me, and community. And He was inviting me to do a gap year already at that young age, I think also because of that situation at the time. So I accepted the invitation of the Lord and I left to Mexico after my high school. And I was there for a year in Tamisa's community, yeah. I was there for a year and it was a very important year for me. It was a year where I really experienced the love of God for me personally as a woman, as a daughter of Christ. It was a very special moment for me. I lived in a women's household. Now I have 3 older brothers, so for me that was a very, very special time. I felt like I had been longing for this for my whole life, and I just really loved it. I lived in a women's household. I was involved in gap training, discipleship training, and I was serving with the youth over there. During that year, I experienced the Lord calling me to serve, not only for that year, but for the rest of my life. And it was just a seed that He had planted in my heart during that year. So when I came back to Belgium, I had a vision for how to spend my student life. I had no idea what would happen in the future. My community was still struggling. But I had received just a vision for those few years, how I could spend those university years. So together with a couple of sisters, we decided to start a women's household. I lived in that house for 3 years. I also helped starting our student outreach at the time. And and I built a really deep relationship with the Lord during that time. It was like an anointed time for me. For a few years in a row, also, I made the decision not to date for a year. I took it year by year, just so I could focus more on the mission. I mean, I had a study which was quite difficult, so I mean, it took a lot out of me, but also I really, really wanted to spend a lot of my focus on the mission, and that just meant I wouldn't have space in my head to date. So I took that year by year for a few years in a row. And during that time, I prayed a simple prayer daily and regularly. And it was just, I mean, you all do it all the time, but it was just, I prayed the Lord to take my life. I gave the Lord my life every day. I prayed, please come, Lord, and take my life. And that prayer turned into asking the Lord to really come and take my life, because I didn't feel like I could really fully give it myself. I really needed him to come and take it. And I really felt like he was doing that for me. So I could do whatever he pleased. I wanted to surrender myself fully to his will, to his plan for me. And I just really wanted to know that I had done everything I could to surrender myself. I wouldn't have been able to live with a thought in 10 years' time, oh no, I didn't really fully surrender back then. I really needed to know that for myself. I've done everything I could to surrender myself to the Lord. And so that prayer really just helped me to focus on the Lord and not to look too much at myself or at the path that I was walking on. Because student years are just, they're a special, special time, and everything is still open before you, and it's very easy to fill your mind with what it's going to be like, what do I want for my future, and to just fill your mind with that is a really easy thing to do. So it really helped me to focus on the Lord and not worry unnecessarily about things. Of course, I had to think about things, but not unnecessarily worry. During that time, I also discerned if I was called to marriage or remain single. I love teaching my girls already at this young age about all these kind of things. I can tell this story because she's in bed just now, but our Ella, the little girl, our youngest daughter, she's intrigued with romance and love and marriage, and she's really intrigued by it. I wasn't like that at all, but I find it quite endearing and quite interesting to work with. So she can like stare at my ring for ages, and she can she's very intrigued by it. And one day last week, she was sitting on my lap and she was looking at my ring again, and she was asking, "Mom, who do you think I will marry when I grow up?" And I said, "Well, listen. First of all, you need to ask Jesus if that's what he wants for you. After that, once you've grown up, you've made lots of friends, you're ready to get married, you need to wait until the right guy comes. You need to wait until the right person comes along to marry." I said it like in children's words a bit. And asking Daddy if it's a good idea is always a good idea as well. So she was all captured by this, and so she's like, so step one is asking Jesus if he wants me to get married. So right there and then she bowed her little head, and 30 seconds later she lifted it with a big smile on her face, saying, "I think Jesus wants me to get married." So guys, please guard her heart. She still has a long way to go. So when I discerned the Lord calling me to be open to marriage, thoughts started to invade my head. And so what was helpful for me at the time, and what I decided to do, was to start to make a list to bring some order in my thoughts. And that list contained just thoughts about things that I believe, no, what was it? Thoughts to do with the kind of man that I think I could marry. So I had like my 3 big categories. That's just what I came up with, what I found helpful. First category was the things that I thought the Lord was calling me to. Another category was things to do with my personality, my character, what I'm like. And then my third category had some things to do with my vision for family and for work. Like, for instance, I was convinced that the Lord was calling me to be a missionary and that I shouldn't compromise on that. Back then, I felt in that place, I felt that was quite an unusual thing to state, and I really didn't want to compromise on it. I'm really impressed now these days to see so many, if not all of you, be so on fire for the Lord and wanting to live a missionary life. I'm really impressed by that. Just wanted to say that. But and another thing, for instance, personality, character-wise, was I was quite aware that I'm quite a strong-willed person. So I just put that there as well, that I should probably be looking for a man to marry who's like strong enough to look after me, to be able to lead me, that I wouldn't like stumble upon or like rule. So it was important. I find it really important that the man I would marry would be strong enough to actually be above that and love me and care for me. So again, this list really just helped me to focus and approach this area in a purposeful way. And it also helped me keep my emotions under control. So when I caught myself getting a little dreamy about a certain guy, I would pull out my little piece of paper, set myself down, go through it, and tell myself, forget about it. Also, it just helped me to understand that at that point, emotions shouldn't play the main role. It also helped me understand that there is such a thing as marrying the right person. I don't think there's only one Mr. Right, but it is important to marry the right person, like we were saying already. We have an important role as married people for the next generation, and we don't want to spend all of our time just making our marriage work. We have other work to do. So anyway, so I had all that, and I worked on that list for about a year, and I always had it on me. It was in my wallet. I still have it. I didn't bring it, but it was a very helpful approach for me personally. So I always had it on me, and I would change things and add things and just ponder over it for a certain amount of time. And there were a few guys around that I could have been open to date. Not that they would have wanted to date me, but it was just, I think there could have been a few guys who could have been a good match, but yeah. And then during that year that I was composing my list, I started serving together with Paul a bit more. And it was a great way for just getting to know him a bit, and for experiencing an ease of working together, for experiencing an ease of communication, is that how you would say it? Yeah. We just could communicate with each other quite well. So I ended up not being single for very much longer, as Paul asked me out by the end of that year. And I thought I should give this a chance, since I was open to date. I believed he kind of matched the profile of a man that I believed I could marry. But I also had my doubts. I was wondering, will he be able to make time and space for me, to love me, to look after me? We started courting, and quite quickly we worked out that we could make a good fit. So we were attracted to each other, obviously, as well. That's very important. And soon after that, we got engaged. So we've been married now for 8 years. I know that's not very long yet, but I can say that having built relationships with my sisters and household before was really helpful. They are still the main relationships that I draw from. As a mother with young children, I don't really have much space physically in my mind and my time to build a lot of new deep relationships. So that really was the prime time for me to build relationships that I still now, this day, draw strength from. Also, my list that I still have is useful today still also, because sometimes I need to remember myself why I chose to say yes to Paul. There are moments that I need to remember myself, believe it or not. And yeah. Also, I still believe the Lord calls me to be a missionary, but it has taken on a different shape from when I was single. And accepting that has not always been easy. My availability for the mission obviously has changed. My main goal now is serving my husband, my family, my children. And at times that is just all-consuming. There's no space for anything else sometimes. I'm still involved in other service as well, but sometimes not as much as I would have dreamt when I was still single. So I've had to walk that path of acceptance, and also of learning to see and to understand that serving my family these days especially is also radical. That is also being a missionary, and it is full of opportunities of serving the Lord. So thank you.
Thank you, darling. Take a couple of moments just in silence, a little reflection moment. If you want to write something down, feel free. Just a few things briefly, and then we're going to split. The pre-relationship questions, good questions to ask. We've somewhat covered this already. Should I even get married is a question you want to ask. Next question, am I ready to get married? Whatever that might mean. In some cultures it may be a little different, but I don't really think there's any point in dating someone unless you're ready to get married. I challenge you to convince me otherwise. If maybe someone can convince. If you can convince me, please convince me. But if you're not ready to get married, well, I think there's a better way. It's not morally bad. I don't think it's wrong or something like that. But I think there's a better way. I think there's a way that we can more generously respond and more with faith respond to the Lord. Am I ready to get married? What kind of person should I be looking for? I think that should be clear by now. You can start your list. I have several copies of Noemi's list. I post them on the mirror in the bathrooms just to remind her that it's a good idea that she's married to me. And what kind of person should I be looking for? So there's some questions to ask even before getting into a relationship, choosing for a relationship. Keep on going, Donald. Yeah, so this is a little quote that I like. Love does not consist of gazing into one another's eyes, but looking together in the same direction. Love is not about gazing into someone else's eyes, but in fact, looking together in the same direction. I think that kind of shift in perspective is a helpful one for us in terms of relating to marriage as a mission. Keep on going. So this is brief, but so there's obviously a kind of keep on going stage where you're is getting to know people, and then there's we call it courtship, which is a kind of old word for being in a purposeful relationship where you're moving towards marriage and trying to discern, should we get married or not. That's kind of the point of courtship, is to discern. I mean, there's other good things about it as well. It's fun, it's enjoyable. Should be, at least. If it's not, that's normally a good sign that it's not a good idea. You shouldn't have to mainly work on your courtship, you know? It should be joyful, enjoyable to be with this person. You should enjoy it. But getting to know people, this kind of first stage, how do I get to know people? Well, I think one of the keys here is what I would call a pastoral leader. Having someone that you're talking to about this stuff is really, really helpful. And if they're able to help you move forward and make some of these decisions, able to encourage you, able to put you in situations perhaps where you could meet people, serving together is one of the best ways actually to get to know a brother or a sister that perhaps you could marry. Because that's what you do for the rest of your life. You don't court for the rest of your life. You serve together for the rest of your life. So when that kind of, that guy who's really not at all musical suddenly ends up on the music team, you might want to ask the question, what's going on here exactly? You know what I mean? Like, okay. But serving together is one of the ways that we can get to know one another as well. Okay, but in the discernment process, this kind of courtship stage, what's your vision for family life, for work, for mission, for community? Culture is another big question area, I think sometimes. People from different cultures. Communication is the key thing. Is it working? Is it easy? Or do you mainly have to work at it? So those are some of the stages, let's say, of moving. It's kind of obvious, no? I often think this area is, in a certain way, it's kind of simple. But it's also an area that causes a lot of discomfort, questions, anxieties, fears. But if we're really following the Lord, looking to the Lord first, I think in a certain way it's kind of simple. So I think we've said enough. We're going to split now. We're going to take the first period of time, split. The men are going to stay here, and the women are going to go into the other room across the way, and take the first 20 minutes until 20 past in silence. And then the women are going to get together in their women's groups, so with your normal group. And Anya will tell you when to pull it together, stop the silence, start to talk. The point of the silent time now is really for you to have some reflection and some, what's the Lord saying to you? What's the Lord saying to me in this? Any questions, things that I are challenged by or want to raise? As Q said earlier, if you're not challenged by this stuff, then we at least have done a bad job. But it's a challenging area, I think, for a lot of us. So allow yourselves to be challenged, to experience a little bit of discomfort. Okay, so we're going to take some time now. If the sisters can go next door to the other room, and we'll take some silent time.